Hi there, and welcome to the Gnostic Rebellion. Today we're speaking with Moni Castaneda, architect, Feng Shui designer, and author of Nine Steps to Feng Shui. Moni's built a science, theory, and practice of Feng Shui from the depth of her life's experience in spiritual studies. We'll introduce her in a moment, but first, for our congregational network, you'll see immediately below the description to this video will present a donate link. Please click on that link and make a donation to support our historic building and congregation, as well as to keep this program funded so that we can continue. So if you hit that button right now, um, while you do that, I'll give a brief blessing. May wisdom and divine providence increase the unique genius of our congregation and bring us to health, wealth, and increase of days. Okay. Moni Castaneda is a best-selling Amazon author with 11 published books on Feng Shui, as well as having co-written four others. She has her own YouTube channel with hundreds of videos and has put together 100 online courses, as well as over 500 blog articles. She is prolific in her work, as she is active in her thoughts and draws her life from the spiritual education afforded initially by her father. But now let's let Moni introduce herself. And Moni, welcome to the Gnostic Rebellion.
Thank you so much for having me over. I'm very happy to be here.
Good, good. We're glad to have you. I really want to go right into talking about your father because
Yeah,
he is a pivotal figure in your life.
I guess, for everybody, the main figures
Yeah,
of your life are your mom and dad,
good.
and they have certain functions. Your mom is more the nourisher, and fathers, I guess, traditional they have been seen as the disciplinarian. But in ancient Chinese philosophy, which is where feng shui comes from, the one of the roles of the father is to be a spiritual guide, right? And so it's a very complex relationship because my father was, unfortunately, he was abusive, he was a bully. He had a lot of curiosity about the world, and he had an extensive library of books on philosophy and Gnosticism and all sorts of esoteric materials. And I had access to that. I think it was probably 12 years old when I ate when I read the Kybalion, and so the access to all these books, right? For me, growing up in a Catholic country, in a Catholic family, which was kind of forming my mind in a certain way, right? But one of the things that I saw is the things that I was learning from my catechism, right, didn't match the world. They didn't work for me, and I also saw they didn't work for other people. And then there was this all these materials, to read. Sometimes some of the materials even came in comic book form, so it was really easy for me to consume.
I can show
And
you
it
some great
was,
comic books. So,
yeah. And so it was eye-opening. So there's so many things that people get exposed to today, I guess through conspiracy theories and the dark web and all these things. I was exposed to them at 12 years old, right? Because it's so easy today. I mean, you can go to YouTube and if you show interest in one thing, they show you something that is more controversial and then more controversial as you keep clicking on videos. And everybody can see these interesting and sometimes outlandish stories. But back then, it was virtually impossible for somebody like me to get access to that material, except my father was a curious person, and he would go to the Gnostic community in Quito, Ecuador, and he would come back with books and all sorts of materials. Yeah.
now, the community he was associated with was, founded by Samael Ayon Weor, who's a
Yes.
perhaps even worse than just a controversial figure. But nevertheless, uh, you, without in any way praising his philosophy or what they do, you presented an interesting view that we might not be able to have in America? When we spoke earlier, you said that um, this was your first step away from the strict Roman Catholicism of your culture.
Yes, but I need to say an aside here, right? And there's currently in the United States, there is a very conservative and kind of rigid version of Catholicism. That was not the case over there. You know, Catholicism in Latin America is is very open to science. You know, like
Well, it
I
is here
remember.
too.
Well, there
It's
are
not
some
close to
groups.
science. It's Protestantism, or really, I should say, fundamentalism, which is a heretical
Yeah,
part of
but
this country.
there are certain groups in the United States today, Catholic groups, that are veering away from science and going back to literalism.
I didn't
And
really know that,
oh, really? So there's some
because that
very
would be very
prominent public
fundamentalist for
figures,
a
some
Catholic.
very prominent public figures in the highest levels of government, that if they say they're Catholic, right? So in the Supreme Court, for example, and if you follow their histories and you see what are the churches they belong to, they're very strict conservative
Oh
Catholic
yes,
churches.
well, I mean,
Yeah.
their anti-abortion stance and other things, but we don't want to waste our
But
energy
it goes,
complaining
I mean,
about
it goes
Catholics.
beyond that. It goes beyond stances. They're actually very, I mean, they are some of the Catholic uh, churches, or some of the forms of Catholicism that are spreading in the United States right now, they go back 400 or 500 years. And in what we saw in Latin America, yes, that we transcended. And so, for example, in my Catholic school, I had a class where they explained why evolution was not in conflict with Catholicism.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
If they're going there, they're going backwards. But
yeah,
of course, if you have a belief structure, an ideology
mhm,
that tells you that man arrived on this earth 6,000 years ago, fully created, and the rest of it's
yeah,
just delusion for our scientists. Um, that's about as nihilistic a statement as you can make. It really is to say
yeah.
that human endeavor is essentially meaningless. Just go to God.
Yeah, and to me, it is surprising to see some of the things that people believe today. And but I have reached a conclusion regarding this. What people believe depends on who they trust. And so,
Well, if you're
yeah,
not doing your own thinking, if
and it
that's
doesn't
really.
matter, you know, in certain areas, it doesn't matter how much evidence you show people if they don't trust the source, you know. So, for example, if a person has decided no scientist can be trusted, it doesn't matter what amount of evidence you show them, they're not going to believe it,
Well,
right?
that's ideology, right? I mean,
Yeah,
ideology will trump rationality, every
yes.
time if you cling on to it and you put up that wall of cognitive dissonance.
Of course, yeah. And so going back to Ecuador, right? I was growing up in a Catholic family, you know, so then part of my family became Protestant, but still Christian, right? And I was being raised, and I was going to this school, and I was learning these things that were supposed to be life skills, and I wanted to put them into practice. I didn't just want to stay with the ideology, and I saw they didn't work, you know. Like, for example, I think I was probably 9 or 10 years old when I did my first communion, and they taught you that if you did something that you didn't feel proud of, you had to repent, you had to confess, then you would be forgiven. And if you really meant it and you had a firm purpose of not doing those things again, it would be resolved. And that wasn't the truth, right? And then I thought, maybe it's just me because I'm 10, you know, I'm 9 or 10. So then I started observing the people around me and seeing how they went about it. And I saw there was no true change. And so, and not to question a faith, right? But there's a difference between a faith fulfilling you spiritually and a faith actually giving you tools that you need for life.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
yeah,
As a Gnostic, we don't have any faith.
okay, of course, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
It's entirely experience. You can experience God. You don't have to believe in it.
Yeah,
You know what I'm
and you're
saying?
going after the knowledge. And one way to confirm if knowledge is true or not, at least in the frame of work that gave rise to feng shui, is to see whether it works, whether
Is
it
to
works
what?
for
I'm
you,
sorry.
to see whether it works.
Okay.
Like if you learn something and you try and apply it, does it work or
Well,
right?
with your confessional example was, perfect example of that because, you did all the things you were supposed to do and it didn't change you. So you already applied a Gnostic scientific
Yeah.
approach, an existentialist approach.
Yes. And so even as a child, I'm looking around me and I'm thinking, I remember the day I felt this, I was 8 years old, and I felt, is everybody not very smart? Or are they putting on a show to deceive me? I was 8 years old when I thought this, right? And I actually concluded because, when you're a child, if you conclude that people around you that are supposed to take care of you are not very capable, that's not very safe, right? To conclude that. So I was like, oh, people are just trying to deceive me because everybody must be able to see these things that I see as an 8 year old child, that's not seeing them, but all this curiosity would not have been nurtured in that environment, right? Because in Latin America, right, you have Catholicism is the main religion, but it's also very science oriented. We're very scientific countries.
Yeah.
And so, between the materialism of science and the beliefs of Catholicism, you're kind of formed, your mind is shaped in a certain way. And so, for me to have access to this library of esoteric materials and different ways of thinking, even philosophy and stuff, and it gave me the possibility of thinking, well, maybe things are not uh, as they're telling me they are. Maybe there's other ways to look at the world, and maybe there's something out there that actually works.
Okay, well, yeah, I still remain fascinated at your innate Gnostic approach. And when you talk about being so young and realizing that other people are at least victimizing themselves with poor
Yeah.
thinking, with what seemed apparent and obvious to you, isn't that how genius always feels? I could give you a parallel experience in my own life and it
Yeah.
could present the same kind of thing. And you do end up feeling lonely because everybody else thinks that way and I think this way.
And
Everybody else does
actually,
that and I do this.
yeah, a few of my friends reached similar conclusions. So one of my teachers, a friend in the School of Architecture, he thought the world was a play that had been put on for him, because only as a play it made sense, because otherwise it didn't make sense.
Well, I guess in that sense that's solipsism. So,
Yeah,
and there are still plenty of even serious philosophers that buy into it. So, uh,
yeah,
you leave that for what it is, I guess. Um, so Feng Shui and Chinese philosophy, which I think is it fair to say you were attracted to Chinese philosophy before?
yes,
Yeah.
uh,
So you already had you leaned over into Chinese philosophy because you saw its practicum. You saw
yeah,
um, that it was responding in the right way. You still have this Gnostic approach and an exposure in an offhanded way to a Gnostic school, but it taught you something about your inner life. I loved what you told me about what your father did. While I have my complaint about what he did, it's a fantastic little exercise. Kind of like a Nazi doctor watching delicious ways to torture people. But
do you mean the story about them seeing the light of God?
yes,
Yeah. And so you wanted
and
me to,
before we
yeah,
even get into that, because that's where I want to
yes,
go. But before we get into that, because you've described your father as um, abusive.
yeah,
And yet he had this honest quest for life. So, do you know what they that Italian T-shirt that they call the wife beater?
yes, yeah,
So, our picture of an abuser, when you say abuser, he's coming home every night from work and he's like, "You didn't make dinner right." Slap, slap, slap.
yeah.
But you don't seem to portray him in that way. More emotionally abusive.
Oh, well, he was abusive in every possible way,
Oh, he was.
but he
Okay.
wasn't predictable. When you're describing him, like the man that goes to work, he's unhappy at work, he comes home, he takes it out on the family. My father wasn't like that. He was unpredictable. You couldn't actually, I think he was actually really smart. And I think he had some kind of ESP, like he was very perceptive in certain ways. And, but you never knew what was going to make him have a reaction,
What was
you
going to
know.
tip him, what was the
Yeah,
tipping point?
he didn't have a
But he,
schedule, you know, for a long time while I was growing up, he didn't even have a job. He didn't work. And my mother supported the household, right? And so he didn't have a set schedule. He didn't have a job that he did. And he was completely. Um, you couldn't read him, and you didn't know what to expect. You could be having the most perfect, beautiful dinner where everybody was laughing, and then something would set him off. And so I
would you
felt
say
like
he was extremely neurotic, or maybe seeming a little possessed at times? And I don't mean that
he
literally.
seemed no, he seemed like he had emotional issues, and he could get triggered, right? He could get triggered by somebody else feeling happiness,
Okay.
you
So,
know.
and did that drive him into his spiritual pursuit, do you think?
I I think he had a tough childhood, right? He had a tough childhood himself, and he part of his childhood happened in a boarding school that was a Catholic boarding school. So he had like a similar story of looking at the Catholic upbringing, and in his case, because he didn't have family around, he really wanted to cling on to something that would work for him, right? And I think that was part of his exploration, but also his mom. And my grandmother, when she was 17 years old, they lived in a little bitty town in the Ecuadorian country. And she was 17 years old and she wanted to see the world. So a troop of Roma people came through and she left with them at 17. And when she came back a few years later, she had become wealthy from doing psychic services and readings and tarot readings. And she became really, really wealthy. And then she started a mail order psychic business. She had so much money, and then she used that money to invest in real estate. And so, for my father, I think, like in the same way I was exposed to the materials he brought, he was exposed to that different way to see the world from the Roma that
Okay.
his mom
So,
adopted. Yeah.
I think that's all important to see that, there was something going on in your family. But
Yes.
now let's talk about what this Weor school, the technique this Weor school bestowed on him, and what both his and your inner drive, what both of you took at from that.
I'm sorry, can you
Well,
repeat that?
your
Yeah.
father comes home
Yeah.
and he says that I've now saw God.
Yes. Oh, the light of God. Yeah.
Yeah, the light
So
of
he came
God.
home, right? And he says he went to the Gnostic group and they took him to a separate room because they told him, they praised him, they said he was special and he had gifts. And so they did something to him to make him see the light of God within him. And he came home, and my mother didn't agree with any of these things, and neither did my brother, right? And because he was so rough with me, I think I was kind of desperate to do something that would make him approve of me, right? And so he was asking my mom, "Do you want to see the light of God?" And she was like, "No." And then she was asking my brother, "Do you want to see the light of God?" And then so I said, I'll do it," right? And so he put his thumb and his index finger. He put them on two spots, like between the nose and the eyes, and he held that for a long time. And at some point it started to hurt, and I was thinking, what is he doing? Like maybe it is all a joke, right? And then all of a sudden, it's like my mind exploded, and I didn't see the light of God in my mind, but that was about the time the Star Wars movies came out. When you have those scenes where you go through space and this spaceship is going super fast through space, and you see all the
The
stars
stars.
and the
Yeah.
galaxies go by you. It was kind of like that, and it was amazing. And I remember seeing that and thinking, wow, there's the universe is inside of me. I didn't for a moment think that's the light of God, right? But what I thought is the universe is inside of me. I can access the universe through my body.
Which I find absolutely fascinating because First of all, to criticize his technique, there was no need to do that. Just shut your eyes and imagine. You know what I'm saying? There,
No,
there
no,
was
no,
no
this was,
reason to deliver pain.
well, this
Uh,
was not imagination, though. It was not
well,
imagination. It's actually like a
you
mystical
were
experience.
particularly talented already. You just didn't know it yet. That's my opinion.
I don't know, right? I imagine later on, because Feng Shui shares the philosophy of acupuncture. I imagine maybe he touched on two maybe acupuncture points or something
That's
that triggered
possible.
something. There's, I mean, I don't
You can't
know.
put
I
that
don't know what
down.
he did, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know that it could have been done just through meditation. Maybe it could have been done through meditation, but this was physical. I saw
Well,
something,
yeah,
right?
and it does get physical. The technique, when I say just use your imagination, and when you're trained properly, you can go so deep into it, you'll see it as reality.
Okay.
Okay, so it's there. No need to be so compulsory, but it is a little bit like Carlos Castaneda. He would always slap,
Yeah.
Carlos, and he would move his assemblage point, right? And
Yeah.
obviously, you share that name. Um, okay, so uh, you've now awakened to this inner life. First you're seeing the universe and all of that, but so much more really happens after that.
Yeah, so I remember one time, we were at some point because he didn't work, we were living with my maternal grandmother, and she brought a book and that somebody had lent her on a Friday, and she had to return it on a Monday, and it was a book of Chinese proverbs, and I was so fascinated by it, and I was like, this makes sense. This is the truth, right? And I spent the whole weekend copying the book of proverbs and as much as I could, right? So, and then later on, somebody introduced me to Alan Watts and some of the things that he had written about
Loved
Zen.
Alan Watts,
Then,
yeah.
then I found the Macrobiotic Center, which is food therapy, right? Which also comes from China, but it was adapted, simplified in Japan. And then when I came to the United States, right, I had a degree in architecture from Ecuador. I graduated in July and I moved to the United States in August. And so I went for my first job interview and they told me, we can't hire you because your degree means nothing here. It could not be transferred, right? So they told me I had to go back to school for 4 or 5 years. And then I had to work for 3 years for another architect, and then I could take the board exam. So I was thinking at another 8 years, and I had already been 8 years in school. And so I was like, no, I cannot do that. And so a friend said, well, what are you going to do? And maybe you should look into feng shui because feng shui is along the lines of some of the things you're already interested in in architecture. So I looked into feng shui and I was fascinated by it, by my discerning mind came in again because I never took anything as granted because of all these little tiny failures when I was a child trying to apply the knowledge from our religion and stuff, right? And so I wanted to look at it objectively. And one of the things that really surprised me, there's two branches of feng shui, and or that were available to me in the United States at the time. And one of those uses astrology and numerology, and the other school is associated with the Tantric Buddhist school, right? So I got my hands on all materials on feng shui that I could get my hands on at the time, and I read them and I tried to put them in practice and see what worked. And the one thing that was really salient to me is that when you look at examples of buildings and temples and palaces that were built in China or Korea or Japan with feng shui principles, they're gorgeous. And of course, it's a different culture, it's a different building style, but they're gorgeous. They give you awe. And when I was going to places here in the United States where people had hired feng shui consultants or people that had feng shui their homes, they look strange. And to me, that was a complete disconnect. And now I can tell, right, that I was supposed to study architecture and then not practice architecture because that was going to be my way to understand feng shui. Because I had studied architecture and design and art, I would be able to look at feng shui and actually say, okay, what of these works and what doesn't work? And the way I found out, okay, what does work is by going back to the roots of feng shui. And feng shui shares the same roots with acupuncture, and Chinese massage, Qigong, Tai Chi, and food medicine, herbalism. And so I had a friend that she belongs to a very old school of feng shui, not of feng shui, of Chinese medicine. She studied to be a Chinese doctor with a school. I mean, it's so secret. I'm not allowed to tell you her name or the name of the school. They don't have websites. They don't have books. It's all like person to person training. And so I went to her and I said, okay, can you teach me what are the principles of healing that you use in all these other modalities? And so she taught me that, and then I started using that for feng shui, right? And so the principles, there's wholeness, there's a balance, there's a vitality, there's harmony. So it's like, okay, if this is how you would use it in the body when you're doing acupuncture, how would you use it in the home? And that's what I started to do. And then I tested, I tested with people in the Northern Hemisphere, the Southern Hemisphere, and on the equator to really figure out, okay, what works and what doesn't work.
Okay, so in that, you've developed a theory on the relationship between consciousness and physical form, and that was
Yes,
underlying everything that you just said. I'm particularly interested in what you describe as a continuous feedback loop between consciousness and environment.
yes. So if you think about it, every single item in your home right now is there because you made a decision. Like you made a decision to buy it and put it in a certain place, or somebody else put it there and you decided to keep it there. All of the things in your home are there because you allow them to be in your home. And all those things in your home are giving you a message and are guiding you to live in a certain way. And so everything you put in your home is telling a story. And that story is feeding your beliefs that you have about the world. So you put things in a certain place because of what you believe. And then those beliefs are being held in place by those things still being there, right?
So
If that
could you
makes
give
sense.
us an example of this? What you see, say something that you've walked into someone's home and you've seen something
Oh
wrong.
yes, yes. And so very successful couple, right? They hired me, no kids. They had been married for about 2 years. And I have an interview with clients, and if it's a couple, have a separate interview with each of them. And she said that he wasn't ambitious enough. And it drove her insane that he wasn't ambitious, that he didn't fight for things. And he said she was pushing, right? And so then I walk into their primary bedroom and I see that his side of the bed is almost at the wall. So there's like only 8 inches, 8 to 10 inches from his side of the bed to the wall. So actually, to get in bed, he has to walk sideways, right? Whereas on her side, he didn't even have a nightstand. On her side, she had a huge dresser, beautiful, incredibly expensive, with a Tiffany lamp where she had her glasses and her books, right? And so you can see right there that in that relationship, there's no sense of equality.
Yes.
She feels upset because he's not speaking up. He's not saying, hey, I'm uncomfortable. I can't even walk to my side of the bed. I don't have a nightstand, right? And he feels she's pushing because she just pushed him all the way to the wall. And so in this relationship, there was no consensus, no concept of equality. He felt he was dating up and she felt like she was making concessions by being with him. And they were actually a very well matched couple, all things considered, right? And so that was really interesting to see, And so in the act of the two of them together, taking out the dresser and putting it on another wall, getting two equal nightstands, getting equal lamps, separating his side of the bed from the wall. In doing that, they are making a statement that they are equally important.
Now, did they follow through with your direction here?
They follow through with some of my directions and not with others.
Okay,
And
now the
so
bedroom
they,
situation, did they follow through
yeah,
there?
they follow through. They follow through with that. But there was something else that was affecting their relationship, and it was in the center of the home. Their dining table was too big, and there was not enough space to walk around the table. and that in feng shui is believed to cause arguments. And so they did remarkably well, because I remember that year the stock market crashed and he was a financial advisor. While the stock market crashed, he did really well. And also, she was a realtor, and real estate had a really bad year. And she did really well. Because of the advice I gave him, everything that was about money or career, they follow it to a T. But the things that were about communication, relationships, and harmony, like and that huge table in the dining room, there was just too big a table for them to. If they sat at two ends of the table, it was like a conference room instead of
Yeah.
being a couple eating together.
Corporate table.
They didn't do that, right? And so they eventually they separated. And she let him keep the house, and she bought a condo. Before she left, she took the table that had been hers and she put in a table, like a regular dining table that fits perfectly in the space with chairs that you could actually walk around there. And then she wrote to me and she told me, now I understand what you meant, but now it's too late.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah.
so that really brings me to an interesting point, because I was going to really ask how you get inside the souls of these people to help them, but you really kind of answered that, um, and that leads me to a follow-up here. Uh,
Yeah.
the they put up a wall of cognitive dissonance, or at least she did. Maybe and in that wall of cognitive dissonance, they clung on to some of their neuroses.
Yes. The
You know.
things they didn't want to confront because maybe it made them feel vulnerable, right?
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, isn't that what's so important about spiritual growth, is that we face these things that bring greater challenges
Yes.
to us?
And the home is like a diagnostic board for a person. I can walk into a home and I can see what's going on with that person because their walls are telling me stories, right? And the home will tell me things that the person would never admit to or that they don't even know.
Yes, and I think that's very, very important, you
And
know.
so when I walk into a home, or today, with technology, when they show me a video of a home, I can see by the decisions they have made, I can see where they hurt. And can help them make changes and that are gonna allow them to confront the things they need to confront in life with ease and grace and grow, right? Because it's all about spiritual growth.
Yes. Um, One last thing that I want to get to, and I'm almost deviating off course here, but I had asked you, as an architect, tell me what form must follow function
Oh
means
yeah,
to you.
I'm so glad you're asking that.
Yeah, and you gave me a very interesting and unexpected answer. Modern architecture has redefined function. Can you
Yes.
explain that?
Yes, and let me explain it by using the example of windows, right? When I went to the School of Architecture, I was taught that the function of a window is to allow light in, right? Or prevent light from coming in with the curtains or blinds. And then you can open it so that it can bring air circulation, right? And that was the function of a window. But even remember how I was always questioning everything. And I remember sitting in that class and thinking there are more functions to a window. Because when I was a little girl in my grandmother's house, the house had really thick walls, right? And I could tell, the window had other functions because in that house, the window sill, right, because it was so thick, there were plants, there were plates with bird seed and water, so birds could come over and sing, and you could be in a room and see the birds eating and drinking and taking baths in the things that you set on the window. And so to me, the window was a place from my own experience. The window was a place where you could crawl in with a book and be protected by the curtain so your parents couldn't find you, right? And so one of the things that architecture did is it took away the emotional and spiritual functions of things, and they
Ah,
just went with the practical. So the practical thing that the window is it allows light and it allows air in. But the emotional and spiritual functions of the window are different, right? It's for you to have a communication with the outside without really being outside. It's for you to be in a place that is a little bit outside and it's a little bit inside. And there's also beauty is a function. So one of the things that after doing feng shui for more than 25 years, one of the things that I have discovered is people do not organize ugly things. So the way I help people declutter is not by teaching them to throw things away. It's by having them add beauty. A person is much more likely to clear and clean a beautiful table than a plastic horrible table.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, taking pride in ownership and caring about anything, and
Yes.
yeah, as we would say, everything becomes then a talisman for whatever we're creating.
Yes.
Well, Moni, this has been a great discussion. I wish we had 2 more hours to do
I
this.
know.
We'd
You need to invite
probably
me
have
back.
fun. Yeah, but we don't. That's reality. But that'll give us an excuse, perhaps, to get together again. We'll whip some
Yes,
other
I
set
would
of
love that.
ideas
Yeah.
up. You have a great spiritual background. I think you have something to offer our congregational network, and so on behalf of everyone, we appreciate having you here. Um, and with that, I'll say good night to you, and I'll
Good night.
say
Thank you
good
for
night to
inviting me.
everybody watching, and we will see you on the other side of reality, as they say.